Reg Levy, co-chair of Diversity and Initiative at the Internet Infrastructure Coalition, or I2C. Along with Darcy Southwell, also co-chair, we're very pleased to welcome you to this webinar. We thought we'd first start by introducing you to the I2 Coalition and its Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. The I2C is a trade association. Its members are businesses that build the internet, including cloud providers, data centers, domain name registrars and registries, and other foundational internet enterprises. I2C's mission is to advocate for an open internet that can be used as an engine for growth and innovation. It works with its member companies to advocate for sensible policies, design and reinforce best practices, create industry standards, and build awareness of how the internet works. The genesis of the organization began in 2011, when many of the I2C founding and charter members joined forces during the successful effort to prevent the controversial Stop Online Piracy and Protect IP Acts, commonly known as SOPA and PIPA, from becoming United States law. After mobilizing to ensure the internet's free flow of commerce, realized that the ongoing need for an industry voice was necessary, founding formally in 2012.
Thanks, Reg. So I'm Darcy Southwell, I'm the other co-chair, and welcome everyone. The I2 Coalition's Diversity and Inclusion Initiative was originally established to promote increased gender diversity within the internet infrastructure space. We later pivoted to promote a broader scope of diversity and include a focus on equity and inclusion. Similar to I2C's other working groups, we engage with our members and the general tech community to promote diversity, equity, and inclusive environments in the tech industry. We aim to create an open dialogue on ways to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive spaces through blog posts, educational opportunities, practical tips, and public advocacy. A critical aspect of creating diverse, equitable, and inclusive workspaces is ensuring employment practices and policies that do not create barriers for a given community to be productive contributors. In Canada and the majority of European countries, mothers are offered 52 weeks or more of paid family leave for the birth or adoption of a child. Many other countries around the globe are offering some period of less than a year. But the US is not one of them. In fact, the US is the only country classified by the World Bank as high income that does not have paid maternity leave. And while a handful of states have passed family leave legislation, not all of them are implemented yet. So now we have two proposed bills in Congress that could establish a federal program. So I want to welcome Vicki Shabo, the Senior Fellow of Paid Leave Policy and Strategy at New America's Better Life Lab. She's going to provide us with an update on these two bills. Vicki, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Darcy and Reg and Christian and the whole team at I2C. We have talked over the years about this issue, and I think having now come through a pandemic that has shown just how fragile the United States infrastructure is when it comes to care, the ability of people to provide and receive care, whether it's for somebody else, a child or a loved one, or for their own serious health issue. It's really fortunate to see that our lawmakers have also kind of taken up the call, and that President Biden and his administration and leaders in Congress have pledged support for comprehensive paid family and medical leave in the US. So I'm excited to talk today about why we need this, why it's a business imperative, why it's a cultural imperative, and also how member companies of the I2C Coalition can get involved. Because while we're closer than ever to seeing national paid leave become a reality in the United States, we're also in a very highly divided political environment, which will be no surprise to anybody, certainly here in the US and across the world, most likely. And the window for action is very narrow, and there are a lot of competing priorities. And one of the reasons that we need the business voices to engage is because it's a business issue, it's an economic issue, it's a workforce issue. and you all have really important perspectives to bring to the table. So I'm gonna do slides to kind of lay the groundwork, but I'm hoping that we'll have time for Q&A because often the most important points come out through folks' questions. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and go from there. But yeah, just again, thank you so much for having me. And I hope this is useful. So as Darcy said, my name is Vicki Shabo, and I'm Senior Fellow for Paid Leave Policy and Strategy at New America. New America is a think and action tank located in Washington, D.C., but with offices in various parts of the United States. We work on a range of issues, but caregiving, family economic security, and actually internet open technology issues are part of our portfolio as well. I personally have been working on the issue of paid leave for more than a decade. I have worked with advocates and lawmakers and businesses in states and cities across the country to update state and local policies, as well as with federal lawmakers to move federal paid leave policy forward as well. So when we talk about paid family and medical leave, Darcy already pointed out one of the key reasons that people need leave, which is to care for a newborn or newly adopted child. But reasons for paid leave are really more comprehensive than that. And we're talking here specifically about paid time to provide or receive care, which is separate from vacation or PTO or sick time. This is time that's weeks or months to care for a new child, as mentioned already, to care for a loved one with a serious health condition, an illness, an injury, or a disability that requires care from somebody else, somebody's own serious health condition, something like a serious injury arising from a car accident or cancer or a stroke or the need for a knee replacement, something that takes you away from your job for a period of time. We're also talking about leave for somebody to care for a wounded service member in their family or to deal with family caregiving needs that pop up as the result of a military service member's deployment in their family. A good policy should include all workers, including full-time, part-time, and self-employed. Right now, some full-time workers may have access to benefits like this, but not all of them for sure. And part-time and self-employed workers are often left behind. Wage replacement should either be a worker's full salary, if this is something being provided by an employer, or through a public benefit program, something that replaces a substantial share of workers' wages, particularly for lower wage workers. And then finally, employment protections. Right now, and I'll talk about this more in a second, we have the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, which offers job protection to a segment of the workforce. But when somebody takes paid leave, they really should not face losing their job or retaliation for using that policy. So the plan for this briefing, first, just talking about longstanding needs for investments, talking about the costs of the status quo and the benefits of making paid leave available to everyone. A third, an overview of the state and federal policy landscape. 4, opportunities for businesses in particular to take action. And then finally, as a fifth plank, Q&A and talking with all of you. So first, the longstanding unmet need for paid leave in this country. As I mentioned, the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 guarantees unpaid job-protected leave and health insurance continuation, but only covers about 56% of the workforce. And that's because the FMLA only applies to businesses with more than 50 employees, 50 or more employees, in a 75-mile radius. And it only applies to workers who have been on the job for at least a year and worked at least 1,250 hours or more than part-time in a year. Even so, for those 56% of workers who are covered, many can't afford unpaid time. And actually, the share of workers who say that they have foregone a leave that they needed has doubled in the past decade or so. So paid leave is very, very important. Right now, however, paid leave is provided voluntarily through employers. As of March 2020, so right before the pandemic, only about 20% of private sector workers had dedicated paid family leave to care for a new child or a seriously ill loved one through their jobs. And only about 42% have short-term disability insurance through their job to replace a portion of their income if they themselves have a serious health issue that takes them out of work. And that can include leave for pregnancy or to care for a new child or to care for yourself recovering from having a child. In the past decade, we have seen progress. Access has doubled from 10% to 20% overall, or the share of workers without paid family leave has shrunk from 90% to 80%. The growth has not been linear for workers in all wage levels, however. There's been a 20 percentage point gain for the highest wage workers, but only a 2% gain for the lowest wage workers. And you can see that differential reflected in the chart that's here. So essentially flat for the bottom decile of workers, those who are making about $10 an hour, $11 an hour or less, and growth at the top end. For everybody else, it's been rather moderate. Obviously, you all have a particular interest in the tech industry. There aren't industry-specific data available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, unfortunately, but for workers who are in professional jobs, financial services, other categories of industry and occupation that would include tech, we're looking at about 31% of workers that have access to paid family leave. So the overwhelming majority do not, probably 70% or so. There have been some leaders. Back in 2015, when companies were adopting new paid leave policies, tech was really at the forefront. So companies like Reddit, Alexis Ohanian has been an outspoken advocate and continues as recently as a couple of weeks ago to advocate for paid family leave. Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Pinterest, Adobe has been a great leader. I'm happy to talk about them more later too. Netflix, Zillow, Google, Etsy, Facebook. They adopted very worker-forward parental leave policies in particular. Adobe, Facebook have also done family care policies. And you can see here, this chart is a little bit old, but you can see where the tech industry is with respect to the number of weeks for new moms and new dads. But this leaves a lot out. As I said, around 70% of workers in tech don't have paid family leave, dedicated paid family leave. And there are likely to be substantial disparities based on job type, certainly based on whether somebody is a full-time employee versus a contractor, on the size of the company, whether we're talking about these large, well-heeled tech companies versus smaller startups, and the age of the company, whether it's newer or older, whether they've had workers who have affirmatively advocated for leave, or whether it's something they haven't really thought about. This becomes, and I'll talk more about this too, but just to preview, this becomes a critically important issue when we're talking about diversity and inclusion with respect to gender and race. And so I'll come back to that in a minute, but just to preview that that's one of the reasons that this matters, and particularly for an industry like tech, which is heavily male dominated and heavily white. This is really critical in terms of, not just the inputs, but also the outcomes, how the company is performing, what it's doing, how innovative it is. So Darcy stole my thunder here, but my question here is, how many countries are like the US? And the answer is none. We are the only high wealth country without guaranteed leave for new mothers. We are one of 5 without paid leave for new fathers or adoptive parents. And we're one of 2 without personal sick or medical leave, just us in South Korea. So, and it's not just high wealth countries. We are one of the only, a handful of countries, Papua New Guinea and some small islands, that do not offer maternity leave to new moms worldwide. So this is, there are a lot of ways in which the US is exceptional, and this is one of the less stellar ways that US exceptionalism is manifested. So what are the costs of inaction? There are a lot of them. I just recently testified in Congress, and Representative Katie Porter of Orange County, California, asked me what it means, who is hurt by the lack of paid leave in the US. And my answer to her and my answer to you is everyone. Women's labor force participation is now at 1988 levels, so record lows. And part of the reason is caregiving. During the pandemic, about 15% of all workers in the US left work because of caregiving. Another 8% left for a personal health issue. These are folks we need to get back to work. And it's worth noting that US labor force participation among women was actually low even before the pandemic. It started leveling off in the 2000s as relative to other high wealth countries, as other countries created interventions around leave and around childcare, and we did not. In the before times, before COVID, about 23% of women were back at work within 2 weeks of giving birth, in part because they didn't have the financial security that paid leave would have provided. On average, both women and men have lost more than $300,000 in income and retirement savings when they've left work to care for an aging parent. Overall, families are estimated to lose about $22.5 billion annually due to either insufficient paid leave or no paid family or medical leave at all. The average family loses about $9,500 when they don't have access to paid leave. That is many, many months of rent and groceries, transportation expenses, the costs associated with caring for a new child, or dealing with the expenses that come when a loved one or your own serious health issue causes new expenses for you. So as we rebuild from COVID, there are other factors that we need to take into account. As I mentioned, US labor force participation among women is at record low levels. In the last 40 years or so, women are still disproportionately unemployed or trying to re-enter the labor market. So I'm sure folks have seen, earlier this year and actually last fall when school didn't open as normal, more women left the labor force than were re-entering the labor force. All of the people that left basically on September were women. And we've seen bumps. There have been one step forward, one step back over the last several months. Most recently, women's labor force participation still down, again, at these very low record levels. More women did rejoin the labor force in May, or in the June data, sorry, that just came out. But only about 3% of them found jobs. So lots of women are still out of the labor force. Those who are coming back are having a hard time finding employment. Paid leave is one of the interventions that can help. People of color are also still disproportionately unemployed. Black and Latinx people in particular, both women and men. Then with trends looking forward, more than 1 in 5 adults right now care for a child, an older adult, or both. These caregiving needs are only expected to increase. And in particular, for folks who are thinking about the future of the workforce, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z increasingly have caregiving responsibilities, both for a child and for an adult. So these are policies, paid leave is a policy that the workforce is going to need in perpetuity. Right now, obviously, we deal with this on a case-by-case basis, where workers are left to the voluntary decisions of their employers. But that is not working for us. And as you could see from the previous slide where we looked at trends over time, the market really isn't keeping up with where we need to be. And this is unfortunate because paid leave benefits everybody, essentially, each stakeholder in society. It leads to women's increased labor force and earnings, labor force participation and earnings, which obviously benefits individual families, but also benefits the economy. For businesses, it creates greater workforce diversity and inclusion, helping women, people of color, and people with disabilities to be full participants in the workforce. It creates greater gender equity at home. When men take leave to care for a new child, they are more involved in their children's lives over the long haul. It also helps the women in their lives to get back to work and to have higher wages over time. Investments in paid leave help with compliance around healthcare, whether recommendations for immunizations and well baby visits for children, postpartum care for new moms, people with serious health issues being able to get the care they need. It reduces Medicaid costs and nursing home use, less use for public assistance and food assistance and other safety net programs. It has benefits for businesses in terms of ROI and retention, especially small businesses and startups, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And finally, all of this could add $2.4 trillion in GDP if we are able to correct workplace gender imbalance by putting policies like paid leave in place before the end of the pandemic. The AARP estimates similarly 1.7 trillion increase in GDP by making workplaces more inclusive of family caregivers. So there are many, many financial reasons to do this, both macro and micro. This is also about humans. I think sometimes all of these stats really obscure the fact that this is about somebody like this man named Felix Trinidad, who was a grocery store worker in New York and he couldn't take even a single paid sick day to figure out why his stomach was hurting until he needed to go to the ER and learn that he had stomach cancer. And then after that, he didn't have any time off of work to get chemo. So he would go to work, he would go to get chemo, and then he would go to work. And ultimately he died, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. Stories about moms who need to leave their babies in the NICU, moms who themselves haven't recovered before going back to work. So this is about people, it's about profits, and it's about sustainability. So what do we need in the US? We need a national paid leave policy that covers workers and businesses of all sizes, including full-time, part-time, and independent workers. Comprehensive coverage for all of those serious family and care needs, the ones that are happy, like a new baby, and the ones that are sad and scary, like family members' illnesses or your own illness or injury. Inclusive of all families, a lot of the newer paid leave laws have recognized that family care often means more than just caring for a child or a spouse or a parent, but can mean grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, even chosen family. Super important for LGBTQ families, people with disabilities, families of color. It needs to be affordable to use. So the wage replacement that you get needs to be high enough to actually make use of the program. From a public funding perspective, we need sustainable programmatic funding to provide certainty to businesses and workers. So it's really important that as the US consider this, it's adopting a permanent program and not one that's subject to annual appropriations. Efficient public administration so that workers know where to go to get their benefits, businesses know their workers will be covered, and benefits are supplied on a regular basis. Setting a benefits floor so that employers can innovate around and build on a federal benefit. And then solutions-oriented support for businesses who are managing employee absences and employees' returns to work. I'm happy to answer questions about any of these at the end. States have made progress. So I mentioned before, most workers in the United States are purely at the discretion of their employer as to whether they have access to paid leave. A few states have gotten in front of this. So there are now 9 states plus the District of Columbia that have passed paid leave programs. 7 of those are operational. And for folks in the tech industry in the United States, it should be welcome news that a lot of these programs, you may even be familiar with them, are in places like California and New York, Washington State and Massachusetts, as well as New Jersey, Rhode Island, the District of Columbia, and then programs that are coming up for implementation in Connecticut, Oregon, and Colorado. But it's notable to me that so much of the tech innovation that's happened in California has happened against the backdrop of having a paid family and medical leave program in place since 2002. These are, again, virtually available to virtually all workers. They cover all of the serious reasons that we've talked about. As I mentioned, they provide an inclusive definition of family and wage replacement that is progressive, which means that lower wage workers get an adequate share of their wages replaced so that they can afford to take leave. Some of the early programs didn't have that, and it really depressed take up. So the newer programs have all instituted a system where lower wage workers get more of their wages replaced, usually between 80 and 100%. These are all funded through small payroll deductions. So if you're in a state with a paid leave program, you may have noticed a very small payroll tax out of your paycheck. If you're an employer in that state and you deal with payroll, you know that you might pay a small percentage of payroll into a fund, but this money goes into public funds that workers can then use to get their paid leave benefit. Some of the states allow employers to provide paid leave and then to have to participate differently in the public program. So the states have really paved the way, and the evidence from states about all of those benefits I talked about paid leave to workers and businesses and families and communities, paved the way for this robust federal conversation that we're having. President Biden included a paid leave proposal as part of his American Families Plan, and the very powerful chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee in the United States Congress has his own proposal for paid leave. And these both build on a proposal called the Family Act, which has been around, sponsored by Senator Gillibrand of New York and Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut. But this could be the year that paid leave passes. So you may be following some of the conversations about infrastructure. It looks like right now there's going to be a bipartisan infrastructure package that will mainly be about roads and bridges. Obviously, broadband is a big topic of conversation in these discussions too. And then there's likely to be a separate bill that will encompass the president's American Families Plan and part of his American Jobs Plan. The care economy writ large, which is childcare, long-term home and community-based care, raising wages for caregivers, and paid leave are all part of that package. The paid leave component would cover all workers. It would be publicly funded through various tax changes. It would apply for all of those serious FMLA reasons, the new baby, caring for yourself or a loved one. It would be up to 12 weeks. This is a place where the president's plan and the Neal plan differ a bit just in terms of how quickly we can get to 12 weeks. It offers that progressive wage replacement to make sure leave is affordable and includes an inclusive definition of caregiving so that somebody could take leave to care for a grandparent or a grandchild or a sibling, an adult child, or a chosen family member. But this is really exciting. As I said at the beginning, I've been working on this for more than a decade, and this is the closest that we have ever been. And I believe this is the moment. We are either going to win paid family and medical leave in this country in the next several months, or it's going to be a long time and a long wait, and we're going to have to continue with, the unfortunate patchwork that has created confusion and stress and anxiety and left so many workers behind. I've mentioned, obviously, this is an issue for workers. It's also an issue for business. There are studies that show that paid leave, obviously, as I mentioned, helps women be attracted to and stay in the workforce. Same with people of color. There's lots of research that shows the relationship between diversity and inclusion in workplaces and things like ROI. And so this is and stock prices and all sorts of good for business outcomes. Paid leave is directly related to worker retention, which is related to a reduced turnover, which is related to cost savings. So when companies have paid leave, revenue increases by more than 4.5% and profits go up by nearly 7% per employee, according to a study that was done by Panorama Paid Leave Project and the American Sustainable Business Council. There's also a shared load issue here, or a reduction in externalities. So right now, if you work for one of those great tech companies, for example, that offer good paid leave benefits, but you're part of a family where your partner or your spouse or your siblings do not have good paid leave, it's more than likely that your company is the one that makes it possible for you to take paid leave, whereas the other members of your family won't. That means your company is bearing the cost and other companies essentially are free riding because their workers aren't able to take paid leave. So paid leave is important even if you work for a company with a good leave policy, because your family members, your employees, your coworkers' family members don't have access to leave. And that means the burden is on you and it's on your coworkers who do have good leave policies. I have a colleague who works for an organization that has great leave policies. Her mother was just very ill with cancer and unfortunately just passed away. She is one of 3 children, my friend Ruth is. She was the only one that had paid leave. She also lived the furthest away from her mother. And so she was commuting 2 hours once a week to help take her mother to chemo and to radiation. Whereas her siblings couldn't take that time to be there with their mom, or they would have risked losing their jobs and certainly losing their income. So shared load. Certainty and predictability. Right now, the landscape is shifting a lot. As I mentioned, states are adopting policies and employers are having to navigate that state landscape. Putting a national policy in place would cut down on some of that, that changing, and would create certainty and predictability for employers to determine their own supplemental benefits for the future, should they choose to provide them. For smaller businesses, access to paid leave as a public benefit lets small businesses compete. We hear this time and again in states with paid leave programs. It creates stability and security, and knowing that if a worker is out, you don't have to shoulder the cost of leave for that worker. And it helps you free up resources to either offer different benefits, also to hire replacement workers. And, a couple stories really come to mind here that I'll share with you quickly. So one, on the certainty and predictability, there is a mid-sized firm, I think around 500 employees, that does environmental sustainability. And I know this is a different industry, but I think it's certainly illustrative. They have offices in 6 or 7 states, California, Oregon, and Washington, but also Florida, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. And California, Oregon, and Washington have paid leave programs. They're up and running in California and Washington, not in the other states. The HR VP at this particular firm told me a story about an employee who just found out she was pregnant at the same time as her husband was told that he needed to relocate for his job to Texas. So in that family's case, they made the decision that the mom, the birth mom, the expecting employee, was going to stay in California in order to use the paid leave benefit in that state. And then she would join her partner in Texas. That is a ridiculous, I mean, certainly understandable, but a ridiculous way to treat families in this country. So that means that the family is being separated essentially by virtue of the fact that California has paid leave and Texas doesn't, and that this family needs paid leave in order to survive. In fact, this particular HR manager told me a similar story about 4 years ago when we were on a panel together, where at that time, Washington hadn't yet put paid leave in place. And she had an employee who stayed in California longer, again, post the arrival of a child in order to use California's paid leave program. This particular company offers great health insurance, great retirement benefits, but does not offer paid leave over and above state law or the state program. And so they want to see a national standard put in place because they want their employees in every state to have access to base level benefits. Another great example, Urban Sitter. It's a tech company that helps connect parents and employers with caregivers and babysitters. Lynn Perkins is the founder of that company. She talks about how she has employees in 5 states, in California, Oregon, Hawaii, Virginia, and Colorado. So California has paid leave. Oregon is about to have a paid leave program. Hawaii has a temporary disability insurance program only, so leave for your own personal health issue. Virginia has a paid leave campaign in place, and Colorado just passed paid leave and it's not in place yet. So she's navigating 5 different state parameters. She's a company of about 20 employees, and she's figured out how to make this work with all of the different rules. But she would love to see a national platform as well to help create stability and security across her workforce. So these are just a handful of companies that have joined the fight for paid leave and have become advocates, which I would now love to turn to this last bit of the presentation to encourage you all to do as well. Business voices are critically important. Large organized business lobby groups and then front groups like the National Federation of Independent Business are often fighting against these policies, speaking in very ideological terms about why business should be left on its own and how new policies only create more regulatory hassles and reduce flexibility and increase costs. We know from more than 1,400 businesses that have gotten behind the fight for paid leave that in real life business owners' experiences, this is often not true. The states have shown us time and again that businesses benefit. More than majorities of small businesses in each of the states that have paid leave are supportive of these policies. They talk about how they reduced costs and increased flexibility. And right now, as these policies are being debated and as Congress is determining priorities for the Jobs and the Families Bill, your voices are more important than ever. So this photo here is a meeting that I was part of with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi a couple of weeks ago. You can see here the tech industry well represented: Airbnb, Reddit, Alexis Ohanian, Salesforce, PayPal, Stitch Fix. These are all companies that think of themselves as tech, and they were part of this, this conversation along with Patagonia. Adobe has long been a supporter in this space as well. You can see here the headline from a blog post dating back to 2018, and there are many others. And they are all part of this business coalition that's urging Congress to pass paid leave. So what can you do if you're interested? If you've got an internal company policy, you can measure and discuss the impacts of that policy on ROI, on productivity, on morale, on cost savings, many other ways. I'm happy to talk with any of you about that. If you're in a state with paid leave law, or if you're in multiple states with and without paid leave programs, it's really helpful to share your company's stories, like I mentioned Urban Sitter and this other company, ESA. Advocacy opportunities. Obviously, you can see, opportunities to meet with members of Congress or to write op-eds. Chip Berg, who's the CEO of Levi Strauss, just did a terrific op-ed about how their company has adopted paid leave and the costs have been lower, but how he and the company support paid leave for all. You can look for ways to engage your employees, and you can look for ways to engage your customers. So I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, and I'm going to pause there. But just here are some key takeaways. It's time to end the US's outlier status. We need a national program which employers and states can improve upon. This will help more than 100 million workers and small businesses. The market has failed. We've seen, some improvements, but they've been disparate and slow and not enough. We can make a sustainable, predictable public investment that will yield returns. It will help with workforce D&I. It will help. It's a business imperative and it's an economic driver. And in fact, I didn't mention this, but more than 300 business professors from across the country have actually weighed in with Congress talking about D&I, business and workforce needs and the impact on the economy. Most importantly, we have a window in which to make this happen right now, this year, and this window may not come again. And lastly, success will be more likely with your industry's help, with your individual voices, with your commitment, and with your expertise. So I will pause there and stop screen sharing, and would be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Vicki. I have a quick question. Are FMLA benefits taxable?
So FMLA is unpaid. So there
are the benefits that you are recommending?
That is a great question. In states, they are generally not taxable. I think in the federal conversation, that is, it may be like Social Security where benefits are taxable, or like unemployment insurance. It's a replacement for your wages. So it's likely that they will be, but that is an open conversation.
And is there a version that's currently in front of any of either the House or the Senate that we can contact our representatives and encourage them to support? Or is there a draft legislation we can encourage them to bring forward?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that we have been instructing or sort of suggesting that folks talk about this right now is that we want comprehensive paid family and medical leave, like in the President's American Families Plan, to be part of a reconciliation bill, which is a technical term, but basically a jobs and families economic recovery package. There is legislation you can also point to called the Family Act, which is the Gillibrand DeLauro bill, or the Richie Neal Building and Economies for Family Act. But there's really no need to get that specific given where we are and how everything is moving. But I'm happy to provide sample language for anybody that wants to engage in a, be part of a call to action.
That would be great if you could send that after the presentation, and we can distribute that to our members.
Yeah, happy to.
This is Darcy. I also have a couple of questions. Vicki, you mentioned how companies with paid leave policies can end up bearing more of the burden when their employees, family members don't have access to a similar benefit from their own companies. If a federal program isn't established, what concerns do you have for the future of those companies that currently do have paid family leave policies, and in some cases very generous ones? Is there going to come a point, for example, where they're going to be frustrated and realizing that they're bearing such a brunt that maybe they're not willing to do that anymore? Or what are your thoughts around that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the companies that offer paid leave, as I mentioned, see ROI, see that there are benefits, and they're doing it for competitive advantage. They're doing it because it's something that their workers want and now expect. So, I think in some ways, I wouldn't necessarily think that there's harm to those companies, but it will be an ongoing cost, and it may be a cost that they're willing to bear because it helps them keep their workforce. But their employees are going to be better off and more productive if they can share the caregiving load with other family members, particularly as the population ages. I mentioned at the beginning, right now, about a fifth of adults are caring for a child or an older adult or both. As the population gets older and older, so baby boomers are a much larger population than the populations that are coming behind, which means that we're looking at a situation where there's only going to be about 2 or 3 family members to care for every older worker. We used to have 6 or 7. So the caregiving needs are going to be distributed among a smaller set of people, working age people, and they're going to become more intense. And this is a real business concern, and it's a concern for public policy as well.
And is there an aspect of that too, when you think about, you read a lot about how the average age of when individuals choose to have children has gone up substantially over the years, and how that impacts families today when maybe you used to be caring for an aging parent and your children were already grown, and now you have children in childcare, and you also have an aging parent at the same time. Is there information around that would be helpful in this discussion?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. So there are about 11 million so-called sandwich generation caregivers in this country. So somebody who's caring for a child or has a child in their home and an older person. That's about 10% of the workforce, maybe a little bit more than 10% of the workforce, the private sector workforce. And again, this is going to continue. I think, we've seen from COVID disruptions to people delaying births even more. But this has implications, and it means it's part of why we need a comprehensive paid leave policy. It's part of why paid leave, childcare, and long-term care are all important investments to be made. But it absolutely is a trend that's going to continue. Actually, most of the folks in that 11 million are millennials and Gen Z. So this Gen Z is coming up. Gen X is about 25% of those. Yeah, this is a real trend, a demographic and a workforce trend that companies need to grapple with, and that the government needs to grapple with as well.
Just a quick reminder for everyone on the call, I put it in the chat as well, but if you have questions for Vicki, please put them in the chat, or I believe you can raise your hand, and we're happy to hear those live. I think the other question I was kind of thinking about, and I was shocked to see California's paid leave has been around since, I think you said 2002. That's almost 20 years. And there was a huge gap I noticed in your data there between that and the next state. What is there any observations, I guess, you could share about what California has seen as a result of this that's an impact to either its workforce or its ability to diversify its workforce, or along those lines?
Yeah, so as you rightly noted, so interestingly, California had temporary disability insurance for somebody's own serious health condition dating back to the 1952, I think it is. And then starting in the 70s, women who were pregnant could start to use that to prepare for or recover from childbirth. Added on top of that in 2002 was 6 weeks to care for a new child if you weren't the birth parent, or if you were, to add on to that TDI, or to care for a family member. And that program was put in place. Benefits started being paid in 2004. So yeah, we're in year 18 of that program at this point. We've learned a lot. So part of, you heard me talk about progressive wage replacement, replacing a higher share of workers. California only replaced 55% of workers' wages, and it meant that lower income women in particular had a harder time taking that program, that men didn't take the program as much as you would expect, and that utilization was low because getting by on half of your usual salary is not feasible for a lot of people. California has improved its program multiple times. So it pioneered the inclusive definition of family that I mentioned. It updated the range of family members for whom one can provide care in 2013. So nearly 10 years after the program went into effect. It recently just increased the amount of leave from 6 weeks to 8 weeks for caring for a new baby if you're not the birth parent, or to care for a loved one. They just increased their job protection so that people in smaller companies are not at risk of losing their jobs. So they've made a lot of innovations. To your question, Darcy, about the evidence, We've seen that moms have taken about 2 to 3 weeks longer leave, particularly Latinas and lower wage women. We've seen earnings increase as women are able to come back to and stay in work. We've seen nursing home utilization drop, which obviously is good for the people who are getting family care instead of being in institutional care, but it's also meant savings for Medicaid, so for public health insurance. We have seen evidence of better compliance with immunization guidelines, fewer instances of shaken baby syndrome, and reduced head trauma for children as parental stress has improved. Which is one that's terrifying and a good outcome to know about. We've seen some improved educational outcomes for kids in elementary school when their parents have taken paid leave for the program. So a range of individual level effects. We've seen men's leave taking increase dramatically over the years of that program, so more gender equity in homes. And from a business side of things, we know that about far over a majority of businesses approve of the program. About 60% saw cost savings as they were able to coordinate their own benefits with the state's benefit. 90% or more saw either positive effects or neutral impacts, i.e. no negative impact on productivity, morale, turnover. Trying to remember what the other pieces are. So, California has really been a success story, and it's been a story about the ways in which programs can be made even stronger and more useful. And I guess the only other thing I'll add is you're right. So California passed in 2002, went into effect in 2004. It was then 6 years until 2008, from 2002 to 2008, until New Jersey passed. New Jersey was another state that had pre-existing temporary disability insurance, and so similarly added family leave on top of that. That program went into effect in 2009. The next state was Rhode Island, which is another 5 years down the road, 2013. Also had temporary disability insurance. That program went into effect in 2014, and then New York passed in 2016. And that was the last state that had TDI through a public program already in place. And then we saw really fast progress. So Washington State and the District of Columbia passed in 2017, Massachusetts in 2018, Connecticut and Oregon, I want to say in 2019. This is all from memory, so if I'm off by a year, you'll forgive me. And then Colorado passed an initiative by voters, first time ever, in November of 2020. And that's significant because obviously the 2020 election was very contentious. Colorado is a very purple state, but it passed with higher levels of support than Joe Biden got as a percentage of the vote. And it got majority support even in counties that voted for Trump, which leads to something we haven't talked about, but among voters and people, this is a no-brainer. Before the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, since the pandemic, this is an issue, a policy, public policy that has the support of 8 in 10 voters. And that's true across party lines. So at a time when we're super divided, this is actually an issue on which most people readily agree.
That's really interesting stat, Vicki, because one of the questions I had for you today was that, you read a lot about when we don't have a federal program, and there are companies that do have policies. In some cases, I've read that companies are seeing people not utilize it. And so it's not just that you have to have the paid leave policy, you need to promote it. You need to encourage your employees to take advantage of it. And curious about, your thoughts there, because if 8 of 10 voters across party lines think this is a policy that is necessary, then it's kind of interesting to me, because on the other side of that, some people aren't taking advantage of it. So just curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, policy change and culture change go together. That's true whether you're talking about public policy or individual company policy. But yeah, I mean, you need to make sure that senior leaders are communicating that this is a policy they want workers to use, that it's safe for people to use this policy, that women won't be penalized, that men won't be penalized. So at New America, we've done a bunch of research on men and caregiving. And one of the things that men in particular feels like there might be a policy in place, but unless they're seeing senior leaders use the policy, they don't feel comfortable using it. They worry that they're going to get, sort of maligned for taking on caregiving responsibilities in their households. So yeah, I mean, one of the most effective things that I've seen is like Mark Zuckerberg took a paid paternity leave. There's another pretty senior person at Facebook, a man at Facebook, who took paternity leave, but setting the tone from the top, and then also training managers on how to deal with absences, and then how to bring people back into work is really important.
Thanks so much, Vicki. And unless anybody in the any of the attendees have any questions, I think I'm going to wrap it there. We really appreciate your time today, taking the opportunity to educate us all on this important issue, and specifically for the diversity and inclusive group in the I2C. This was really helpful. I just kind of want to underscore your point about managers modeling good practices. That's something that I struggle with my team, needing to take more vacation, for example. So thank you very much. And thank you all of the people who joined us today, and everybody have a great rest of your day.